Welcome to Bad Cousins. I'm Ben Stoller. I'm Matan.
Hi.
Here with Matan Kaminer. As always, we're doing a bonus episode. Matan, why are we doing this bonus episode in between our usual narrative?
Well, today is March 10th, and we're a week and a half into a war that U.S. and Israel started against Iran, spreading into Lebanon and elsewhere in the Middle East as we speak. And this war, like several others that we could mention, has also been taking on biblical overtones. When it was launched last Saturday, Netanyahu took to the media and said, "My brothers and sisters, in 2 days we will celebrate the holiday of Purim. 2,500 years ago in ancient Persia, a tyrant rose against us with the very same goal, to destroy our people completely. But Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther, through their courage and resourcefulness, saved our people. In those days of Purim, the lot fell and the wicked Haman fell with it." So, this is really, right up our alley, we could say.
Yeah. So he specifically calls out the Purim story. What is the Purim story, and what is its significance then here?
Okay, well, Purim is a Jewish holiday. It's not a major Jewish holiday. It's called one of the minor holidays, but it has quite a bit of historical significance. I think it's also one of the more picturesque holidays that Jewish kids are always looking forward to, and it has this sort of carnivalesque element. It takes place around the same time as Carnival or Mardi Gras in the Catholic world, and it has many of the same sort of connotations, many of the same sort of implications in which things get turned upside down. People dress up, often cross-dress, using the clothing belonging to people from the other genders or from other classes or even from other nationalities. There's a strong element of getting drunk and getting violent on this holiday. Even in some interpretations, it's a commandment to do these sorts of things. And of course, there is the story, the Book of Esther, which Netanyahu refers to. And that book is a very late part of the Bible. It's a very strange part of the Bible in many ways that we could probably get into. But it's definitely a strongly mythological part, and one which involves the story, as Netanyahu says, of Jews getting one over, defeating enemies, which happen to be happens to take place in Persia, which is of course Iran today.
And then now you're bringing up a whole other story, but how does Purim relate to the Abraham story and what we've been discussing in Bad Cousins so far?
Right. So far we've been talking about the story of Abraham, right? The family of Abraham, the family drama of Abraham. Now the story of Esther is very different in a lot of ways. This, Abraham's family is a patriarchal one living in the desert, herding sheep, etc. They are what you would call Bedouin today. And the Book of Esther takes place in a very different environment, which is this royal court, right? It's a very opulent court of a king who rules from India to Ethiopia in a later historical period. But there is also a mythological through line, which is actually a family story. One way of getting into this is through the story of Amalek, this concept of Amalek, which I don't think we've really talked about so far in the show, right?
We have not, but we should.
Yeah. So Amalek is kind of the original bad cousin, I would say. To emplace him or them on the family tree. So we've been talking mostly about the first generation, right? Abraham, Sarah, Hagar, Ishmael, Isaac. But there's more generations in this family story, of course, and the plot continues to thicken. Isaac has two sons as well. They're named Esau and Jacob, right? Jacob becomes, of course, the father of the people of Israel. Esau has children of his own, and one of his grandchildren is named Amalek. Now, when the children of Israel, the descendants of Jacob, are leaving Egypt, they cross the Red Sea. They're fleeing Pharaoh and his soldiers. They're very tired, thirsty, and hungry, etc. And the first people that they meet when they're in the desert are Amalek, and there's a battle. Amalek, who again are cousins, right? They're relatives. Treat the Israelites horrendously, right? They're quite cruel, in battle. They attack old men, old women, children. There are some insinuations, as there always are in the later Jewish tradition, about various sexual forms of misconduct. And most importantly, God declares that Amalek will be his enemy from generation to generation, and declares a mitzvah, declares a commandment for the Jewish people to destroy the people of Amalek. So there's really a very clear demand on the Bible side to act in a way that we can't call anything other than genocidal towards Amalek. Now, the point, our point here, and there is a point here, is that Haman, this evil Persian leader, who is the main antagonist in the book of Esther, is an Agagite. It's said in the book. And Agag is one of the descendants in the Bible of Amalek, right? He's a king. He's a king of the people of Amalek, who also has a battle with Saul, King Saul. And so Haman is directly related to Amalek. There's a consensus position within Jewish scripture that he is an Amalekite. So he's a member of this people that the Jews are commanded to fight and really to annihilate insofar as they can. Okay. So we have this this biblical genealogical connection between the people of Abraham and the story of Abraham and the story of Mordecai, Esther, and Haman, which is so many years later.
That's important, right? Because the story of Esther happens a solid 1,500 years after when Abraham is supposed to have lived. But Amalek is also sort of a vague idea of just the enemy of the Israelites in the Bible. Mm-hmm. And even to this day, it's used by politicians and used in all kinds of scriptures and writing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been used often in the Gaza war, like in the war in Gaza, beginning really the first few days after October 7th. There was this kind of rash epidemic of Amalek speak among Israeli politicians, from Netanyahu himself all the way to supposedly liberal politicians who declared Hamas to be Amalek, and by extension, of course, the entire Palestinian population of Gaza to be, again, if you're describing a collectivity in Amalek in Jewish religious terms, that means that they're not just enemies, but they all need to be annihilated.
They need to be annihilated. Okay. And then the point is this vague idea of Amalek, which you've explained, is clearly associated with Haman, who we're going to go deeper into, who's the central antagonist in the book of Esther, because he's clearly connected to Amalek. So he's an Amalekite. So you did it. You got us from Abraham to Haman.
Very superficially, I was going to say.
That's okay. We got there. And now let's tell the Purim story.
Okay.
We don't have to do it all the way in great detail, but I think we have to do it in order to level set so that everybody can follow the rest of the points.
First of all, we should encourage listeners to read the book of Esther. It's very short. It's very dramatic. Go ahead and blow the dust off your Bibles and read it.
It happens in, like you said, ancient Persia, supposed to have happened in ancient Persia. There's a king named Ahasuerus who is supposed to be maybe Xerxes, but there's no actual connection there. And like you said, it happens in a much different setting than the Abraham story we've been talking about with a bunch of sheep farmers in Iraq somewhere. This is like opulent Persian palaces with cushions and white horses and fancy cottons and big feasts and that kind of scenery.
Yeah.
And then what happens?
So the story starts, interestingly enough, with the king Ahasuerus having a gigantic feast, an opulent feast, as you mentioned. He is the king of this mythically gigantic empire that stretches from India to Ethiopia. And he gets into his head to have his wife exhibit herself to the guests at his feast, right? Wife is named Vashti. And Vashti famously says no. She refuses to exhibit herself to become this sort of showpiece for him. The king gets furious. He decides that, interestingly, that if this is allowed to pass, then women throughout the kingdom and all the nationalities of the kingdom are going to rebel against their husbands, and therefore Vashti needs to be made an example of. And he basically gets rid of her. It's not clear exactly how he gets rid of her, whether she's killed or just walled up somewhere, but she's no longer his wife, which means that the slot opens up, right? And then he holds a competition to see who's going to be his next wife, as the sort of Playboy can. Yeah, like a casting show. Exactly. The sleazy connotations are all in the book. We're not putting them there ourselves. He decides to have a competition. As this kind of superficial Playboy type, what he's really interested in is beauty, right? And one of the contestants is named Esther or Hadassah. She's more commonly known as Esther, who is a Jew, and she is encouraged to participate in this competition by Mordecai, who is either her cousin, her uncle, or her husband, depending on who you ask. So we have cousins, right? We have cousins in here as well. He tells her, go ahead and participate in the show, but conceal your Jewishness. It's an important part of important element of this.
Right. He tells her not to say that she's Jewish.
Right. Mordecai, he hangs out around the palace just to sort of see what happens. Esther, as we might guess, is selected to be a new queen and the wife of King Ahasuerus. While Mordecai is hanging out around the palace, he has an altercation with Haman. Now, Haman is the vizier, the prime minister, the main kind of advisor to the king, right? And he is, as we've already been told, an Amalekite. He's he's a descendant of these people who are the
He's kind of
congenital enemies of the Jews. Sorry,
he's kind of a Stephen Miller character.
maybe more yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, he leaves the
You know, like Witkoff or Kushner would be like the Mordecai.
Okay. No.
Anyway, where were we?
So anyway, Haman leaves the palace one day in all his regalia.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and his
Haman
posse.
is very conceited, and he wants everybody to bow down before him. And one day he encounters Mordecai outside the palace, and Mordecai does not bow down to him. The reason, we don't know, actually. The reason is not given. But Mordecai decides, fuck this guy, I'm not bowing down to him. Which, of course, incenses Haman greatly. And he decides to take it out on the entire Jewish people, right? Again, we're trying to speed the story along here. He gets the ear of the king. The king says, sure, why the hell not? Let's destroy this entire people. And then Mordecai goes to Esther and says, listen, this may be the reason you were chosen to be queen, to save our people. So Esther, she fasts, she sets up this feast, she reveals her identity to the king, and asks him not only to repeal this commandment that has been made to destroy the Jewish people, but also, importantly, to overturn it. And what does it mean to overturn it? Not only that all the honors and respects that were given to Haman will go to Mordecai, who will now become take his place. Not only that Haman himself will be hanged, not only that all his 10 children will be hanged, but also that Esther, Mordecai, and the Jews receive permission from the royal court to take it out on all of their enemies. And all of their enemies, we're told in the story, are 75,000 people, including women and children. And a sort of mini genocide takes place in the empire by the Jews with the sort of approval of the royal court. That's how the story ends.
No one talks about the last 3 chapters.
Well, no one in your liberal synagogue talked about them, but other people talk about them and talk about them a lot. And for a lot of those people, that's actually the point. So Elliot Horowitz, who wrote this wonderful book called Reckless Rights, that I learned a lot about Purim from, actually traces how Purim and the Esther story throughout Jewish history have been used as a text that justifies and authorizes Jewish violence towards non-Jews. And interestingly, as he shows, one of the main sort of target for this sort of animosity has often been Christians. So this is something that I think is important to take into context when we're understanding how the Haman kind of legend has changed in recent memory, because as I think we've touched on, in discussing the sort of triangle between Jews, Muslims, and Christians in the past, theologically speaking, Christianity is much more problematic for Jews than Islam, right? We have this with the Trinity, the worship of saints and the Virgin Mary, etc., and the cross itself, of course, specifically given the fact that there was a Jew that was crucified on it, and that in many versions of the Christian legend of the crucifixion, it was the Jews who had him crucified. This becomes kind of like a very concentrated symbol for a lot of things that make Jews anxious about Christianity. And we've mentioned also that Amalek is a descendant of Esau, right? And just as Ishmael is considered the father of the Arabs and the Muslims in the Jewish tradition, so Esau is considered to be the father of the Westerners, the Europeans, the Christians, right? This is actually the Roman Empire. Even before the Roman Empire becomes Christian, it is identified with Esau, or with Edom, which was another name for him. And then Amalek is a descendant of Edom, right? So if you look at, for example, Maimonides, Rambam, the most important Jewish authority of the Middle Ages, he'll tell you not all Edom is Amalek. Amalek is one of the descendants of Edom. So not all Christians, not all Europeans are Amalek, but Amalek is definitely among the descendants. So he's there, he's lurking there within Christianity. And part of the Purim festivities in many Christian countries over the years has been to do this sort of hanging in effigy of Haman. And this hanging in effigy has sometimes taken the form of something resembling, or vaguely resembling, a crucifixion, which was, of course, enough a lot of times to set off various pogroms and Christian violence against Jews. I think this brings us to to this kind of carnivalesque character of the holiday, right, of Purim. I think it's really, really important. Horowitz really stresses it, and I think he's quite right too. If we understand holidays like carnival, and they exist in a lot of religions, The element of transformation and the reversal of hierarchies, of normal hierarchies, is really, really important in them, right? So even within the Jewish community on Purim, you will have that something like, often there will be like the election of a Purim rabbi, right? So one of the kind of the wildest kids in the yeshiva will be elected as the Purim rabbi, and he'll sort of
He'll be in charge for the day.
burlesquing and parodying the normal hierarchy of the yeshiva for the duration of the holiday. Getting drunk is, of course, an important part of this holiday. Even the Talmud says that you should get so drunk that you cannot tell the difference between blessed be Mordecai and cursed be Haman. Right, so there's a transformation right there. Within the story, one of the dramatic peaks of the Esther story is when the destiny that was prepared for the Jews is prepared instead for Haman and his ilk. And the story says, and it was overturned. It's kind of the
Climax.
most important phrase. The climactic phrase of the story. Trying to bring us back to where we are today, right? To this holiday. Obviously, Haman has been identified with the enemies of the Jews for hundreds of years. During the Holocaust, or in the run up to the Holocaust, we know when fascism was taking over Europe, the identification of Hitler with Haman was very, very common. And after the establishment of the State of Israel, after the rise of Zionism to become the sort of hegemonic ideology among world Jewry in Israel, but also in the U.S., also in Great Britain, you come to see more and more this identification of the enemies of Israel as Haman. This also becomes very, 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 very common. You'll see American rabbis even talking about, not necessarily even very right wing ones, talking about Arafat and the PLO as Haman, as the latter day incarnation of these mortal enemies of Jewry into the 1980s and 1990s. And then, of course, in 1993 or 1994, I'm not sure, you have the Purim massacre in Hebron, right? So the Ibrahimi Mosque, which we have mentioned, that is the mosque that has been established over the tombs of the patriarchs of Abraham and Sarah and their children. This is a holy site that has been shared by Muslims and Jews for hundreds of years, if not longer. 1994, of course, Hebron is under the control of the State of Israel. Dr. Baruch Goldstein enters the mosque on Purim Day and massacres people at prayer. I think 34 Palestinians are killed that day. And this is on Purim. This guy becomes a hero to many of the extreme right settlers who are now running Israel. People like Ben Gvir, they're very much of the same milieu, people that we've mentioned before. I think if we're trying to think about how things are looking today, and what role the story is playing for people like Netanyahu, then these are some of the through lines.
Yeah, we hear a lot about Khamenei calling Israel the great snake, but there's also that he's the great Haman to the Israelis. Yeah. So can we talk more about like Jews and Persians and Iran? And so should we talk about like Cyrus and why people called Trump Cyrus? Do you want to start there?
Yeah. So actually, I mean, look, the enemy in the book of Esther is not the Persians, right? The enemy is Haman, and the sort of sect or party or group within the Persian Empire that is anti-Jewish. Whether it's because they're Amalekites or whether it's because Mordecai pissed Haman off or whether there's some other reason we don't really know, right? But they don't like the Jews and the Jews don't like them. This does take place under the more sort of overarching framework of an empire, which is not actually inherently either pro or anti-Jewish. And this might already sound familiar if you're thinking about today's world. Here the big empire is Persia, and as you mentioned, several generations earlier, we have a historic event which is also reflected in the Bible, a very important event, which is when King Cyrus takes the throne and takes over from the Babylonian Empire, which has exiled the Jews from Judea. He lets them go back. He issues a commandment that says the Jews who have been in exile in Babylonia can go back. They can refound a national home, if we want to call it that. Not an independent state, but a national home under the aegis of the empire in Judea, where they were from. Right. This is celebrated. Cyrus is Polish in Hebrew. He's considered a servant of God. He's considered a very sort of important personage, even though he's not necessarily a very morally upright man in his own right. He was selected by God in order to do this service for the people of Israel. And yeah, during Trump 1, especially around the time when Trump decided to move the American embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, which, as we've discussed in the past, was one of the triggers for the Great March of Return and a real Palestinian rebellion. This was hailed by religious Jews, by religious Zionists, as a sort of messianic kind of occurrence, and Trump was likened to Cyrus, right? So there's this identification between the important global empire of the time, whether that's Persia then or the U.S. today, and their king doing the work of God, even though he's not necessarily a very wise or a very moral character. And this is the same with Ahasuerus, right? Like Ahasuerus is not presented as being a particularly likable guy. He's not presented as being particularly moral. He's basically being manipulated the whole time, whether it's by Haman or whether it's by Mordecai and Esther. So again, we can see parallels to Trump, of course. But if we're talking about Iran and the way that Iran is thought about, within kind of Israeli Zionists and earlier Jewish imaginaries, there's also a very strong ambivalence there, because Iran, Persia, generally speaking, one of the empires that Jews lived under pretty well. In fact, when the Persians conquered Jerusalem in 614, apparently the Jews of the city took their side and also used the opportunity to avenge themselves on the Christians in the city. So there's definitely a sort of a Persian-Jewish alliance that you can look on historically. And of course, Iran, up until the 1979 revolution, under the Shah, was one of Israel's best friends. There was a very, very, very close alliance between these two states, and to this day, if you see the rhetoric that people like Netanyahu as well as Trump, especially Netanyahu, is using, they'll always say the war is not against the Iranian people, right? We love the Iranian people. The Iranians and the Jews have a long history together. The war is against the regime, and of course, the regime is unpopular. We know that the regime in Iran is a dictatorial one, and a lot of people in Iran oppose it. But from an Israeli or a Zionist point of view, I think it's very easy to say, okay, our war is not against the Iranians, but against this kind of Amalekite minority, which is integrated itself in or seamlessly within the Iranian people, and then you can have this conflation, as we've already seen happen many times. You make a conflation between a religious group on the one hand, a political group on the one hand, and a family group on the one hand, right? So Amalek is considered to be the sort of genealogical category, right? They're the people who are descended from a particular person who lived 3,000 years ago. Now, there's of course also a sort of moral element here, right? And if you want to look at other readings, readings that are more sympathetic or maybe more progressive of the story, Amalek is kind of a hard one, right? It's a hard part of the story, as is the Book of Esther, right? To sort of assimilate into a progressive or humanistic worldview. But there have been people who have been trying to do that. And for example, one way that you can do it is you can point to the way that Amalek is presented in the story as being people who have no respect for the rules of war, people who have no respect for the sanctity of the lives of women, children, and old people, who are cowardly and who are unafraid also to use sexual violence in warfare, right? And these are things that you can say that the late Israeli playwright, for example, Anat Gov, in the 1990s. Was arguing explicitly with the people in Israel who were saying that the Arabs were Amalek, and she was saying, no, the Arabs are not Amalek. Amalek is a moral category for people who have no respect for basic moral principles, who will target women, children, and old people. And in this respect, there's I think it's very telling that one of the first things that happened during this war, and we still don't know if it was the U.S. or Israel who did it. Apparently, it was the U.S. Was this bomb that fell on a school and killed 200 school children. Yeah. Right. That's how this war started. Maybe 150. I don't know. I don't think we have exact numbers, but so there's always other ways of reading these stories. I think it's really important to understand, and it's really important to think also about the sort of carnivalesque aspect of the story. Okay, I mean, in the Middle Ages, when people in Europe, including Jews, were using these carnival-like holidays, whether it was actual carnival or Purim, these people who had a lot to be angry about. There's a lot of things throughout the year that that were kind of building up within people. The feelings of oppression, feelings of being put down, and kind of repressed by the hierarchies that they were living under. Whether you're a peasant who's living under the hierarchy of the church and the monarchy and the nobility, or whether you're a Jew who's living under the oppression of the Christian majority that's around you, when there are opportunities to overturn that, and even temporarily to do things that are normally not allowed, that'll come out, and it'll come out in often very sort of violent ways, right? There's no two ways around that. We can see that historically happening, whether we like it or not. And I think that's part of the story. That's part of this kind of a very ambivalent and very troubling energy that appears at these moments.
The kind of chaotic violence.
Yeah, there's a kind of chaotic violence also that I think is very inherent in this war. To take it back from anything progressive to how destructive things are looking at the moment. Like it's been very very commonly noted that there doesn't appear to be any actual strategic purpose to this war. Like Trump does not know what he's doing. There is especially if you look at what people like Hexeth are saying, there's a pleasure, there's a sort of sadistic pleasure that's taken in sort of like kicking the beehive and just making mayhem. and this is what the region and possibly the entire world is descending into is this kind of destructive violence. It doesn't seem to be building anything up. So if you want to take a religious point of view, and I think sometimes we need to, there's a chance, or at least there's a hope, that out of something so chaotic and so destructive and so mind blowing, something utterly new will have to arise, right? And this is this sort of messianic hope that's embodied in holidays like Purim, and that I think is natural, or in some ways I think it's if we want to have any sort of hope in this sort of historical situation, we have to embrace the possibility that something entirely unforeseen will emerge from this chaos and from all this evil that we're seeing around us.
And of course, not to revel in the destructiveness ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We can recommend that book, that Elliot Horowitz book, Rise of Reckless Rights. And I hope that people who've grown up with the Purim story that maybe are listening to this, like I have, I don't know, maybe read it in a slightly different way. And if Netanyahu can use it to justify or to sort of connect and drum up support for a deadly campaign, maybe there's a way that we can all find a way to use it, like you said, Matan, to capture some kind of hope. I do think that the feminist readings of Purim are a good place to start, where Vashti, denies the king, where Esther denies Haman and the king, and maybe the way out of this is women have to save us.
It really ties back to what we're talking about with Leon in last episode, right? About Sarah.
Yeah.
Because Esther can be taken as a sort of kind of like a mean bitch heroine in the same way that Sarah was, and she has that, right? Like talk about Project Esther. You know what Project Esther is? It's this kind of like McCarthyite project of that the Jewish Zionist right is trying to undertake in American academia. So they definitely see Esther as one of theirs. And there's a current even among liberals or even among leftists to sort of wash their hands of this entire story and say, okay, maybe we need to even abolish Purim, or the Megillah is like it's not really very Jewish. It's too violent and it's too mean spirited. For Martin Luther, it was the opposite. Martin Luther thought that the Book of Esther was the most Jewish book of the Old Testament, and he did not mean that as a compliment, right? Famously, the God is never mentioned in this book, right?
All right.
Anyway, the point is, I don't think abolishing this sort of thing, just like trying to step away from it and say, oh, that's not our Judaism. This is like a sort of atavistic whatever. And Esther and Mordecai are like they're actually kind of sinister characters. I don't think that's the right way of reading it. I think Esther and Mordecai, they both. I mean, Mordecai, nobody really understands why he refuses to bow to Haman. There's a lot of discussion about this in rabbinical literature. What is it exactly that he was refusing to do, right? And it's clear to everybody who was in the discussion that he's putting not only himself but his entire people in a lot of danger by doing that. Is that a responsible thing to do, right? He does that on the one hand. On the other hand, Esther is told to deny her Jewishness, right? Esther becomes this sort of Marana, right? I mean, she becomes a crypto Jew in the palace until the moment where she reveals herself. So what is that about? Why is that the right thing to do? It's not entirely clear either. There is this my favorite moment in the book, when Mordecai goes up to Esther and she's sort of very troubled by the situation, and he says to her, "Who knows if it was if it was not for this moment that you were selected to become queen?" And although God is not mentioned in the book, there's a sort of like implicit mention here that there's a logic behind things, right? And even I think even people who are very flawed, even people who are mixed up and complicit in various forms of power in various ways, they have the opportunity sometimes to do the right thing, to make a real impact. And Esther definitely does that. Maybe she has so much pent up rage. Maybe she has so much so much humiliation and degradation that she's had to swallow and had to suffer through. Maybe that's what makes her so angry that she and after doing the right thing, she becomes genocidal, right? After taking care of her people, she decides to go on the warpath and become vengeful. So I don't think Esther is a role model necessarily, but she's certainly a very interesting character. It is a very interesting book, and I wouldn't want to push it out of the Jewish bookshelf.
No, we should avoid any of the good Jew, bad Jew kind of stuff. And also, there's other parts of Esther when she fasts and bathes and prepares herself for multiple days that has been connected to a kind of Zen or a kind of spiritual preparation for a life or death moment where she's either going to suffer the same fate as Vashti by the king or get her wish. She's allowed to touch the scepter in a kind of horny way, like you texted me the other day. But yeah, we should wrap up. I think we've done it. I think we've shown how deep this can go. And what I also really like is we've practiced sort of applying your framework. In the live event last year, people asked, what's the point of using this kind of applying these analyses of myths and religious texts to contemporary geopolitics.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think this is a good example of once again we see that it's being used, and it's our responsibility to kind of parse it. And if we don't provide some kind of other side to it, or some kind of analysis and understanding of it, why should this war be taking place with the kind of tacit support of anybody who's ever been to Purim?
Yeah, again, I totally agree. We didn't start it, and we wouldn't be making this bonus episode if Bibi hadn't, made that speech. I think our listeners need to understand what their enemies, if we want to use that language, are talking about, right? And what ideological tools they're wielding. Whether we want to try to wield, those same ideological tools in the other direction or not, that's up to everybody who's listening. I'm not saying this is necessarily something that everybody needs to take up for themselves, but it's important to understand the stories and the sort of work that they're doing.
Right. It's like, you could be Esther, you could be Mordecai, or you could be Haman's horse.
What does Haman's horse do? I forget that part.
I think it's given to Mordecai.
Oh, okay. What does that mean?
Haman took the king's robe, put it on Mordecai,
Yeah.
put him on his own
Takes him through the
horse,
streets and saying,
and then he parades him through the city before he's hanged.
yeah, indeed.
All right, Matan, thank you so much again for the connections and the depth and the research. And we are preparing a bibliography of sources for people that have been asking for this for months. So stay tuned. We'll put that on the website. In the meantime, we'll be back in a couple weeks with the proper episode 6 of Bad Cousins, the finale. Thanks so much. Bye.